Hi there, welcome back to Readings and Commentary with Insane Sam. These are readings from history, philosophy, poetry, just anything the written word that I like that you might like. And today we have something special, and it's going to go on all week. A few weeks ago I published this book, my fifth book, Thrillery at the Distillery, How to Distill Alcohol at Home Without Screwing It Up, because I screwed it up a bunch of times. But this 44% bourbon is the first good bourbon I ever made, and I'm going to have a sip of it here while I'm giving you this reading. Well, about a week ago, after the book came out, my lifelong friend Jamie Collier, fraternity brother of mine since the early 1970s, asked me if I'd ever come across the speech by a guy named Noah Sweet, who delivered a speech in front of the Mississippi legislature about the good and evil of booze. And to tell you the truth, I'd never heard of it. So I decided to look up some stuff for a whole week's worth of bourbon readings and whiskey readings, and today it's going to be a list of just quips of funny things other people have said about whiskey. You're not going to get to hear the speech from Mr. Sweet until the third reading this week. But here we go for some good whiskey quotes. I hope you like them. Here's Johnny Carson. He says, "Happiness is having a rare steak, a bottle of whiskey, and a dog to eat the rare steak." Dean Martin said, "I now drink healthy, scotch and carrot juice. You get drunk as hell, but you could still see good." Jerry Vale, who was a famous singer back in the 40s and 50s, he said, "Whiskey is by far the most popular of all remedies that won't cure a cold." Here's a great one from Rodney Dangerfield. "My family was a bunch of drunks. When I was 6, I came up missing. They put my picture on a bottle of scotch." P.J. O'Rourke was a famous satirist from the mid-20th century. He said, "Giving money and power to the governments like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys." There's a guy named Ashwin Sanji, an Indian novelist, like India, Indian, not, the United States Indians. And he was a novelist over there. I never heard of him before, but here's what he had to say. "Whiskey's killed more men than bullets, but most men would be rather full of whiskey than full of bullets." Here's a bunch of them from the great W.C. Fields. "My own experience has been that the tools I need for my trade are paper, tobacco, food, and a little whiskey." He goes, "I always carry a flagon of whiskey in case of snake bite, and furthermore, I always carry a small snake." He said, "When life hands you lemons, make whiskey sours." He said, "Set up another case, bartender. The best thing for a case of nerves is a case of scotch." "A woman drove me to drink, and I didn't even have the decency to thank her." And finally, "Anyone who hates dogs and loves whiskey can't be all bad." Here's some from the great Mark Twain. "The true pioneer of civilization is not the newspaper, not religion, not the railroad, but whiskey." He said, "I always take Scotch whiskey at night as a preventative of toothache. I've never had a toothache, and what's more, I never intend to have one." And then he said, "Whiskey's carried into committee rooms in demijohns and is carried out by demagogues." A guy named Tommy Cooper, a Welsh comedian, said, "I'm on a whiskey diet. I've lost 3 days already." There's a guy, you guys may have seen the TV show Vikings that was on cable a few years ago, and there's a guy named Travis Fimmel. He played Ragnar Lothbrok, the head of the Vikings. He said, "My idea of working out is drinking whiskey instead of beer." Even Abraham Lincoln had one. General Grant was supposed to be a big drunk. He really wasn't, in fact, but when he heard that people complaining that he was a drunk, he said, "Well, I wish some of you would tell me the brand of whiskey that Grant drinks. I'd like to send a barrel of it to all my other generals." Babe Ruth had one. "I learned early to drink beer, wine, and whiskey. I think I was about 5 when I first chewed tobacco." A guy named Compton Mackenzie, he was a Scottish fiction writer, he said, "Love makes the world go round, not at all. Whiskey makes it go around twice as fast." The great Hunter Thompson, great novelist, said, "I like my whiskey old and my women young." Errol Flynn, who was, a notorious philanderer in his day, he said, "I'm a simple man. All I want is enough sleep for 2 normal men, enough whiskey for 3, and enough women for 4. Carl Sandburg was a poet. He said, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If the woman don't get you, then the whiskey must." Raymond Chandler, the great hardcore mystery writer, he wrote a lot of great mysteries. He goes, "There's no bad whiskey. There are only some whiskeys that aren't as good as others." And then there were some toasts I came across. "Here's to whiskey, scotch, and rye, amber, smooth, and clear. It's not as sweet as a woman's lips, but damn sight more sincere." Here's another one. To the rough and the smooth, to drinking with prudes, to loosen their thighs with whiskey and rye. And here's one from my good friend Kip Attaway. Here's to the bull that roams the woods and does the cows and heifers good. If it wasn't for him and his big red rod, we wouldn't have any beef, by God. And I saved this one for last. It's Humphrey Bogart. It was his last words. I should never have switched from scotch to martinis. So I hope you like that stuff. I think it's a lot of fun. That's the end of the reading for today. The next one's going to be readings from the play Harvey with Jimmy Stewart, where his best friend's a big 6'6" rabbit that only he can see, and they like to go to bars together. And then on Friday, you're going to get the great whiskey speech from Noah Sweet. With that, Insane Sam out. Do me a favor, subscribe, and that's it.